there are some people who are going to say that wearing a skirt that's shorter than knee length is obscene. Think about how we use it in everyday conversation. That man is obscenely wealthy. It is a very, very broad word. But the way it's used in the policy, you'll notice you have libelous, obscene, and profane right next to each other. And that comes from, that comes from a U.S. Supreme Court case. It's Chaplinski v. State of New Hampshire. And that was the case where the Supreme Court first set out what things may always be prohibited without violating the First Amendment. Those are lewd and obscene, profane, libelous. Also fighting words, but obviously that's not going to apply in a newspaper. So those terms were drawn from the U.S. Supreme Court case. And anybody, my first impression when I took a look at that, the reason I went right to there was no violation of a policy here, is because those words have very well-defined meanings. And it's not the ones that we have in our head in everyday conversation. It's the ones that have been laid out by the courts for years now. And that definition is the one that comes from, this is also, this cause of substantial disruption of the school comes from Tinker v. Des Moines. That's the case that first acknowledged First Amendment rights of students in the public schools. Now, obscene, the definition that comes from Miller v. California, I cited that in my notice of appeal because that's the definition that you find no matter where you look. That's the definition you're going to find from Black's Law Dictionary. That's the definition you're going to find if you look under dictionary.com. That's the definition that everybody uses. And there's a reason for that, because obscene means anything unless you have a clear definition of it. That policy is drawn directly from U.S. Supreme Court cases. You can't pull the language from those cases without pulling the meaning that the Supreme Court had in mind when it used those things. Anybody who looks at those is going to say, oh, these are the exceptions to the First Amendment. We all know these, and they all have particular meanings. To be obscene, a work taken as a whole, not one part of it, not one word of it, not one photograph of it, but the whole work must appeal to a prurient interest in sex as determined by the average person applying contemporary community standards. It must portray sexual conduct as specifically defined by the applicable state law in a patently offensive way. And finally, the piece that this would never violate is it says it has to lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. This is an argument in a piece about gender equality. That's the whole article, and it must be taken as a whole when you're considering what is obscene.